On June the 22nd, 1940, Britain stood alone against the Nazis. France had surrendered, and Prime Minister Winston Churchill could only growl defiance.
We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender.
Britain still had all the resources of its vast empire. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, India, and a host of other territories had all been quick to declare war on Germany. But they were thousands of miles away, across the oceans, and their military power could not be brought to bear where it mattered. Britain's situation seemed hopeless, and Hitler had no doubt that Britain would soon try to negotiate a peace. But Churchill quickly showed how determined he was prepared to be in the war against the Nazis. A powerful squadron of 2 French battleships and 2 battle cruisers was lying in the port of Mers el Kebir in French North Africa. If the French ships fell into German hands, the British Navy's position in the Mediterranean would become impossible. So on July the 3rd, a Royal Navy task force demanded that the French ships either join it or sail to a neutral port to be interned. The French refused. So the British opened fire on their former allies. They destroyed or severely damaged 3 of the battleships. Almost 1,300 French sailors were killed. But Churchill's ruthlessness didn't seem to impress Hitler. On July the 19th, he returned in triumph to Berlin and was greeted by more than 1 million people. That day, he made a speech in the Reichstag, the German parliament, offering peace terms to Britain. His offer seemed generous. Britain could keep its empire. In return, Hitler wanted a free hand in Europe. His plan was to conquer the countries of the East in order to win Lebensraum, room to live, for the German people. But Churchill would have none of it. The British would fight on. This would, as he put it, be their finest hour. Churchill's defiance was immensely popular. King George VI wrote in his diary, "Personally, I feel happier now that we have no more allies to be polite to and to pamper." But it was difficult to see how Britain could ever turn the tables and actually win the war. The British Army might have survived Dunkirk, but it had lost almost all its tanks, artillery, and transport in the evacuation. It had just 25 divisions armed mainly with rifles to resist the vast armoured columns of the world's most fearsome war machine. So there was little to be done except dig in and wait. Coastal defences were prepared and concrete strongpoints built all across southern England. Signposts on roads were removed to make it harder for any invaders to find their way around. Large open areas were littered with obstacles to deter airborne troops. A volunteer defence force, the Home Guard, was recruited. It was made up of men who were otherwise ineligible to fight, often because of their age. By the end of June 1940, almost 1.5 million volunteers had signed up. But there were few weapons with which to arm them. Hitler, meanwhile, was getting on with his invasion plans, codenamed Operation Sea Lion. Some 20 divisions would be landed on a broad front along England's south coast. Barges were gathered from all over northwest Europe. These were hurriedly converted into makeshift landing craft. Troops were trained for beach landings. But for all Hitler's bravado, those planning sea lion were worried. Hitler might dismiss the English Channel as just another river to be crossed. But Britain's navy was still the largest in the world. It might be stretched thin by its worldwide commitments, but the Royal Navy's home fleet far outnumbered the German navy. The German naval chief, Admiral Erich Raeder, had no confidence that he could seize control of the English Channel for long enough to get the army across. But the Germans did have one area of apparent massive superiority. The Luftwaffe far outnumbered Britain's Royal Air Force. The Luftwaffe's commander, Hermann Goering, had little doubt that he could establish air control over the Channel long enough for sea lion to take place. On July the 10th, the Luftwaffe began attacking shipping in the Channel. In response, the British had two of the most outstanding of the new breed of single-engine, multi-gun monoplanes. The Supermarine Spitfire and the Hawker Hurricane. The Spitfire was slightly faster and more agile than its German rival, the Messerschmitt Bf 109, which escorted the German bombers. It would be used to intercept these. The Hurricane would prove a lethal bomber kill. But in July 1940, Air Vice Marshal Hugh Dowding, the head of Fighter Command, had less than 700 fighters. Against them were 2,600 German fighters and bombers. The odds against the RAF were daunting. Dowding knew that he could not take on the Luftwaffe every time it came over the Channel. So when the Germans began hitting British shipping, he did nothing. Instead, he would only use the RAF to stop the Luftwaffe from establishing the air supremacy needed for invasion. So he would only take on its big attacks. To help him, the British had one crucial innovation: radar. By the 1930s, scientists in both Britain and Germany knew that objects well beyond human sight could be detected by bouncing radio pulses off them and measuring the time it took for the signals to return. In Britain, a team of scientists led by Robert Watson Watt began developing radar as a means of detecting approaching aircraft at long range. Their work was seized upon by Dowding. He made radar the core of the world's first integrated air defense system. Known as Chain Home, this was a string of 21 300-foot-tall radar masts sited along the south and east coasts of Britain. These could pick up aircraft at a range of 120 miles and give their distance, direction, height, and numbers. The information would be passed back to RAF Fighter Command's headquarters at Bentley Priory, just outside London. There, it would be assessed, and warning of an impending raid passed to Fighter Command's operations room.
Moonshine 1-4, Sky Blue, take target 1, channel G George. Roger.
Controllers would then alert the nearest RAF airfields and scramble the necessary number of fighters. The question was, would radar make up for Germany's massive superiority in numbers? The stage was now set for what would become known as the Battle of Britain.